So in terms of how did these grants help us strategically or pragmatically, they really helped us in both ways. These are programs that we were looking to do anyway, but they were things that had to happen while we were technically still closed for the season, and we would be closed no matter if it was COVID or not. We don't open until May 15th generally, so doing these programs on Zoom actually helped us reach a larger audience and gave us access to allow audiences to join us while not having to charge for tickets. And I think that that makes a big difference when it comes to access, certainly. We were reaching new audiences for sure. And those program I want to speak to specifically is our Nathaniel Hawthorne play, which was actually called Mr. Noble Melancholy. Someone actually called him that at one point, and I think it really fits him and his demeanor. And so this was actually a play that was written by a local playwright, a former retired teacher, and they wrote it. It had its world premiere in person in 2019 here. And when we offered it online, thanks to the Bridge Street funds, we partnered with our local community college, so the Berkshire County Community College, and their program called OLLI, which is the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. And this is such an amazing program where we find that here in the Berkshires, we have a lot of retirees. And what happens is they are the most intellectually curious people. And so they join OLLI. And so OLLI offers many, many programs, many, many classes. And they are incredibly well attended. They have a huge reach in our county. And so by partnering with OLLI, we were able to extend our reach so far. We had 400 people registered for the program. That is unheard of for us. So now I will say that's how many people registered. I think when it came down to it, how many people actually logged on at the time of the program, probably more like 200, but still pretty amazing in terms of our numbers and the numbers we're used to seeing. So this was a program we then moved into the house. So we actually performed it in the Herman Melville house. And there were new parts to it. There was a question and answer at the end, which we had a lively discussion at the end. So by partnering with the college, it also allowed us a lot of additional resources, their reach, their mailing list, their technical prowess, which I don't necessarily have on my own. So I had a moderator from the college who was taking care of all that. I didn't have to worry. So that was such a relief to us. So in terms of new formats, new partners, new audiences, it was such a game changer for us. And in terms of new formats, I will say, you know, we've obviously been doing Zoom, but we did do a hybrid program with our Moby Dick Marathon at the end of July. This was the 5th year, I think, we've done the Moby Dick Marathon. We're not totally crazy. We don't read for 24 hours straight like they do in New Bedford. We do stop and we take it, you know, about 10 to 5 every day. But this year it meant that we were able to offer it in a hybrid format. And that was definitely a learning curve. But it meant one person in the room and the next person may have been waiting on Zoom. So that took a little bit of practice, but once we got into it, it was much easier to manage than we initially thought. So that's certainly something that we'll actually be bringing forward, especially as times are still quite uncertain. People aren't as, excited to come out in public, especially now that it's getting a little colder. So certainly something that we'll carry forward with us. And that was an extremely successful program for us too. We actually had a surprise reader who is a huge Melville fan, unbeknownst to us. And all of a sudden, you know, up on the screen, the name popped up, Paul Giamatti. And so Paul Giamatti is apparently a huge Melville fan. I don't know if some of you heard, he read for an NPR program over COVID in the early part of 2020. And yeah, he just popped up in our marathon, and he was so moving and so amazing. We actually asked him to read the end of the book, and it brought people to tears. And, you know, I say that, but it was true. It was a pretty amazing experience. So those are all things that happened thanks to the Bridge Street funds that we received. We were extremely pleased with the way they all went, and we're actually excited about the Expand Massachusetts Stories grant that we are embarking upon now. So thanks so much, and I welcome any questions.
So Lesley, what are you going to do to keep up 400 people through the OLLI program? That's like, you know, everybody's dream. They live in the Berkshires, they've got time, they're intellectually curious. How are you going to keep them?
Well, we're always welcome, apparently now, to partner with OLLI. So if we have a specific program that we find that would be appealing to this group, we send it out, and they are happy to work with us. We have a lot of board members who are also part of it. So we have a great relationship. And the Berkshires it's a small place, it's a small community. So anytime we have a connection like that, especially to one of our colleges, it just ends up working out quite well, and they're always willing to work with us. So I can't go back to that well too many times, but I will certainly be going back again.
When you figure out how to sign them up as members, let us all know. Panelists, do you have any questions for Lesley?
Can you say a little more about the theater piece and what it meant to do a play that had been done live then as a Zoom performance? Was it that you had videoed it when it was done live and then released that, or was this a new Zoom theatrical?
We had recorded it when it had been done previously. We had done it actually in our barn here at Arrowhead. And we had 3 performances in person. This was in 2019. And I would say we may have had 40 people per performance. When we decided to do it again, because it was a local author, so she had a wide reach. She had a lot of friends that she was bringing in. And then we had the OLLI connection. The playwright decided to add new pieces to the play. So she actually added in a narrator. She added in some off-stage voices. So when we moved it inside, it actually worked quite well and so it was a live performance via Zoom. But what looked like you were in the parlor, which you were, in the parlor of Melville's home. It just obviously was supposed to be Hawthorne. And it ended up working well. We had to play with the lights. Those of you who are familiar with historic homes will know they are not the best lighting. So we did have to play with the lighting a little bit. Wi-Fi inside the house is something that we have had to update a lot, especially over this whole pandemic. I'm sure many of you have had to struggle with that too. In order to keep a Zoom tour, any Zoom program going as you move throughout the house, the Wi-Fi can be spotty. So we have had to take measures to really try to update the Wi-Fi and the connectivity. So it was actually, in a way, it was almost a new performance. So if you had seen it in person, you had a completely new view of it as you saw it online, because there were new pieces added to it. So I hope, and I didn't hear from anyone who had seen both, but everyone seemed to enjoy it and like to be able to talk at the end to a local playwright and to a local actor, the local actor who starred in it both times. So it seemed like it worked out really well. And because it was slightly new and tweaked just a little bit, it seemed to really get people excited to see it.
Is it available for us to watch it? Can you put a link in the chat?
It might be. I can't remember if we recorded it or not. I'll check on that for you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Karen, you want to take us to the amazing Porter-Phelps-Huntington?
Sure, delighted. So I just began chairing the board of the foundation in January 2021. So it feels really exciting to be part of conversations with all of you much more seasoned people and doing this work, but it's been so exciting to step up to it. So if you don't know, for those of you who don't know, the Porter-Phelps-Huntington Museum is a historic house museum in Hadley, Massachusetts. And this house and the agricultural land, which is still farmed, that it stands on, and its furnishings and papers remained in the same family from construction in 1752 until descendant James Lincoln Huntington turned it into a museum in 1949. Consequently, the museum offers an unusually coherent material, agricultural, and archival record of 200 years of rural community life. The 1752 house is not heated, and like Arrowhead, it's only open to visitors from May through October, with programming that's centered in house tours and community days, and more occasional free educational programming, as well as 2 signature community summer music events, Wednesday Folk Traditions, and a perfect spot of tea with tea and cakes and music on the back veranda, things which have been very much missed these last 2 summers. So in the summer of 2020, the museum was of course closed to visitors and summer interns working at socially distanced tables in the very ventilated spaces of the veranda and the corn barn, and mostly with masks on, were able to process recently donated family papers and post stories about what they found on the museum's website. And that was really excellent, useful stock-taking time, and it permitted the museum to make real progress in processing collections that had been backing up. But that was pretty passive sharing of new research, and it didn't really find ways to actively reach out to audiences. People had to decide to go to the website and click on what's happening at the museum to hear those stories. So facing a second summer of closure in 2021, it was really crucial to develop some means to engage audiences. And it just felt like such a gift when the Ridge Street grant was offered and the museum received one. So that was just an enormous boon for prodding us to think about how we could reach out. And the museum ran 5 presentations. They were Zoom sessions and some lectures and book talks that are formats that the museum's used in live programming in the past, but also a number of conversations between different people with relations to the museum or its history that worked really well on Zoom to have 2 people talking to each other. And that was a format that the museum had not used as often in its public programming. And the people who presented ranged from prominent scholars to a past summer intern who had done particularly exciting research. And Zoom allowed us to inexpensively bring in speakers from as far away as Oregon. So people who'd worked with the Porter-Phelps-Huntington papers who are now way too far for us to have been able to have had them come and present in an in-person mode. And really pleasurably and surprisingly, many audience members came from far beyond the local as well. We had people from New York and Wisconsin and California who came and attended Zoom programs. And that kind of audience catchment has really not generally been the case for museum programs. We hadn't planned it this way when we were inviting speakers. We were just thinking, who's done new work? Who would be interesting to ask to speak? But the stories that unfolded in these events made links between the Porter-Phelps-Huntington House and other local cultural institutions and histories in ways that proved really provocative and productive for us. So Anna Plummer, who had been a summer intern at the museum and also a tour guide at the Emily Dickinson Museum, presented her findings on the friendship between Emily Dickinson and Susan Phelps of Phelps Farm. And Bill Harley gave a presentation on Clifton Johnson's photographs that not only attracted very far-flung Johnson family members, but also helped us to think about the relationship between two Hadley cultural institutions in ways that I think we'd known before, but really hadn't articulated as clearly. When Clifton founded the Hadley Farm Museum to house his collection of farm implements, he needed a building for it. And James Lincoln Huntington, who wanted to tell a genteel story about his forebears and the illustrious men in his family, didn't much want the Porter-Phelps-Huntington's barns and other outbuildings. And so he happily donated it to house the Farm Museum, turning its stone foundation into an elegant sunken garden, which is where the concerts now still happen in the summer. So those kind of overlaps really got us thinking about not just the historic connections between local cultural institutions, but also the potential for developing future connections. And this fall, the museums participated in drafting a joint grant proposal for joint programming with 4 other Hadley institutions. And we have other incipient collaborations that are all feeling very exciting and promising. And we don't really know where it will lead, but our Bridge Street program surprised us in bringing forward stories that linked various small local historical institutions in the Valley. And it's clear that paying attention to those connections is a sustaining thing. So at Porter-Phelps-Huntington, we called our Bridge Street program Bridging the Past and Present, and I'll give the 2021 summer interns credit for that good title. And I think in real ways, the experience of those summer programs is helping us to forge a bridge to a more collaborative future. And I think as part of that too, I want to give a shout out to the Pioneer Valley History Network, and both the revolution happened here and the documenting the early history of Black lives in the Connecticut River Valley program. I think certainly the second of those projects, and maybe both of them, had mass humanities funding, but there were other sites this summer that got the museum to work together with other local institutions to think about what are the larger history stories we can be telling. By the time the Bridge Street grant programs launched, the Porter-Phelps-Huntington Foundation had already submitted grant proposals for an NEH More Perfect Union and a Mass Humanities Expanding Massachusetts Stories grant programs to undertake a significant reinterpretation initiative for the museum that would no longer center the museum's narrative on the family who owned this homestead, but will draw on a growing body of exciting new research, including many of the work of people who presented in the Bridge Street programs, to offer a more inclusive interpretive experience, reflecting the lives of Indigenous, enslaved, indentured, and day laborers on the site. The Bridge Street programs we offered were primarily centered in that new research, letting us see what stories were most interesting to our audiences. And I think when we were fortunate enough to receive those grants, having spent the summer talking about this history and hearing community questions about it, really launched us into the reinterpretation work in a much more grounded and better way than would have happened if we hadn't been practicing telling these stories and thinking about them all summer. And when hopefully, surely, maybe the museum reopens for the public in the summer of 2022, we expect to be able to tell a much more inclusive, larger story about all the lives in this region. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen. That's fabulous. And it occurs to me that I've spent my life in history museums, that we get so tied up in the place and the stuff and the very specific stories. And when we're freed of the house, and it kind of opens up your brain. I mean, obviously you'd been thinking about, other scholars had been thinking about, but it's like, well, if we're not talking about everything all around us, we can talk about anything. And that seemed very freeing and very inspiring.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially because in that sense of the ways in which founders' intentions for museums always, have a tug on them, an undertow. So I think it matters that the stories the museum was founded to tell were elite stories. And there is a way in which you have to kind of push against it to tell different stories. But it's also, they were such magpies. So there's so much paper record and there's so much stuff that there are things. And part of what we're doing with the grants too is really looking at the physical things, looking at the collection, the grants we have now, looking at the collections and saying, what are the other stories that these objects can tell? So which are the objects that are most useful for telling stories about the people who worked in this farm, not just the people who owned it.
And are you going to continue to be more of a year-round programming institution or stick to the season for the house?
So I think right now we're really we're deep into reinterpretation work. So I think it feels like using this closed time to learn new stories feels like the priority. What'll happen once we know them and whether we can do things like get the living in retirement Amherst people to get excited or whatever, like that. Lesley is having me thinking about that. So one of the things that's been happening out of sort of digging into the reinterpretation research has been having more engagement with, we now have a band of 4 UMass graduate students in history and African-American studies and public history who are doing research projects for us. And I think the likelihood that we'll be able to keep doing that. And I guess I should back up and say, this is my 2 Zooms in a row week. And so we did do a Zoom program, just on our own about some of the research that we were doing yesterday. And so I guess it is totally true that you all taught us that we could do that. So even when we're closed, we may in fact keep doing more of those.
Thank you. Other questions from the panel for Karen? Anything before we keep going down the Mass Turnpike and land in Cambridge with Marieke at History Cambridge? Okay, Marieke, you're on.
Thanks, Laura. Marieke here, she, her, hers pronouns. Calling from Cambridge, Massachusetts, traditional homelands of the Massachusetts people. I'm really so jazzed about everything we're doing here and Laura says I only have 6 minutes, so I'm going to talk fast and I apologize. But happy to talk anytime about all of our great work, and that is in part to Mass Humanities taking a chance on us. So we were founded in 1905 as the Cambridge Historical Society. I don't need to tell you what was going on in 1905 in this country. We were a typical historical society. We were founded for rich white people in the richest part of Cambridge, the oldest part of Cambridge, West Cambridge. Fast forward 100 years and some change, this organization has been trying to break out of that mold of being only for a certain kind of person. I came on in 2015. There was a strategic plan done, and in it literally said, like, we're the historical society for the whole city, which is like, duh, right? Like, but they had to say it. They had to write it down and say it, which was kind of remarkable. So we were testing some things, doing some things. Shout out to Mass Humanities who funded us doing some early experimental work in 2016. Along came the pandemic. We had actually, in January of 2020, started doing a strategic plan with one Laura Roberts. It was going off to a great start. Pandemic hit, we freaked out, didn't know what to do. Everybody freaked out. After a few months of recovery, we actually started doing our strategic plan, and it cemented a lot of work that we had been doing over the past few years, trying to be a different kind of organization. It's all on our website, and if anybody's curious about it, please go check it out, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm in love with our strategic plan, and we're 1 year in, and it's still doing amazing work for us. One specific tangible goal in there was really democratizing history with a small d, sharing our platform, and really becoming an anti-racist organization. We were founded in white supremacy, and had been doing that for a long time, and we wanted to reverse that. As Brian alluded right in the intro, like the social justice stuff over the pandemic, a lot of that was just coming to a head for us, and the pandemic was a great opportunity for us to change that around, and we were committed to doing so. We wanted to tell the stories of people we had historically purposefully excluded, and we got the Bridge Street grant, and we decided to do some programming on Black history. So we did 2 amazing events. Our first amazing event was, we had already had an intern. We had money for an intern who we hired to do some research on Black people in the years leading up to and immediately following the American Revolution. So she was doing this great work, put together this history hub, and she was able to get us Dr. Taya Miles to do a program, which is no small feat, and we're huge fans of hers. And she lives right here in Cambridge. She was teaching at Harvard, and she came and gave a great program about Harriet Jacobs. And the students also talked about their work with Cambridge women abolitionists and the place that Jacob was right at the center. It was amazing. It's on YouTube, go check it out. Our second event was with Dr. Janie Ward, who is a woman who lives in Cambridge, and she was researching, yes, National Book Award winner, just to say, like, you know, graduates of our programs are just, you know, National Book Award winners, but that's Cambridge for you. Our second event, Dr. Janie Ward did this amazing presentation on the history of her home. And when she talked about her house, it really led to a larger conversation about how neighborhoods in Cambridge were developed. And she was Black, she's Black, an amazing storyteller. We were all riveted just to hear her, just like sit and hear her talk about her neighborhood, and how people were able to get homes, how her parents were able to get the home. And the whole thing was remarkable. There was this neighborhood, freed enslaved people in Cambridge settled and formed a neighborhood. And this is a lot of white faces on the call. The post-event surveys, the most common comment that we heard was, I didn't know anything about this history. And that was remarkable because the Black people in Cambridge know about it. The white people don't. And that really like hit home for us. We're like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We haven't been telling their story, and nobody has been telling their story. They've been talking amongst themselves, and there's been a huge divide. And it's important for us as public historians and as a historical organization to fill in all those gaps in the historical record. And it's our duty, because of how we were a white supremacist organization, to go back and fill in those gaps. We have a responsibility to do that. If we don't share the whole history of this place that we call home, we're not doing our job. We use history to make a better Cambridge, and we're not doing that if we don't tell everybody's stories. Preaching the choir here, I understand. So both of those events were some of our best attended events ever. So we had, both those events combined, over 100 people were on them live, but over 500 people have watched on YouTube. So it's just every time I go check YouTube, those numbers keep going up. And I think it's word of mouth. And we've been posting those videos, like we've made compilations, like if you're interested in the Black history of Cambridge, here's some resources that we have. And so people find that and watch them. So Zoom, of course, we know is a pro and a con, but we've really embraced that people were interested in this topic. And a lot of folks who have moved away, especially people that grew up on that street with Dr. Ward, tuned in from California, shared their own stories, and it was great. And I think these people, there was one woman who just kept calling to like double check she got the Zoom right. And she invited her Aunt Lucy, who lives down in such and such, and she can join by phone, right? And just kept calling to like double check that this was happening, because this was the history of their street. And it just felt I think we forget sometimes because our history is so often represented, that if your history is not represented and then all of a sudden it is, how valuable that is to you. And it just, a lot of things just clicked for us. It was amazing. So we knew that people wanted to know about Black history. They said as much, and they were surprised and they were interested. And so that really told us that we need to do this. And I think another important aspect of doing these programs and highlighting Black history with Black speakers, sharing that history, was that we were growing trust in the Black community in Cambridge, which we hadn't done. We had never done that. We hadn't dedicated ourselves to that. And so we did. And this all sort of flows into our expanding Massachusetts Stories grant, and that we were like, hey, you know, people really care about this history. Let's do more of it. We're really interested in it. So we started to write out a plan for 2022. We sketched out some programs, and because we had done the programs in the past with the Bridge Street grant, we had the support of folks who were able to write us letters of support and say that we're behind you on your next project. And it was proof of concept that we could do the work and that we would, you know, honor it and do it well. I'm going to stop there. So thank you. Thank you again. I'm going to give a shout out to Catherine Stevens, who I'm sure everybody knows and loves, but is an amazing resource for mass humanities and all of us history people.
Yes, thank you, Catherine. So Marieke, you had already, I should say we, had already experimented with getting off of Brattle Street and doing programs around the city, observing that Brattle Street was a physical and psychological barrier for a lot of people. Was going online better or worse than being at a bar in Central Square?
Yeah, so I should explain that we have a historic building on Brattle Street, which is, you know, one of the fanciest places in America, and lots of rich houses, except for us. We're just, here we are amongst all these rich people. And it has been a barrier for people to access us physically. We're super far out and there's no parking, et cetera, but also intellectually, because people of color don't feel welcome coming here and have told me as such. So yeah, I think being online just removed those barriers. Sure, we would have loved to see people in person. That's always wonderful. But when more people can join and it's easy and you can join in your pajamas, people are going to do it. And I think we were also ahead of that curve of Zoom burnout. So it was a bit of a sweet spot that I think we really tackled.
Any other questions for Marieke? Susan? Or are you just teeing yourself up for going next?
Oh, no, just teeing myself up. Sorry.
I do have one question for Marieke. Because you had referenced your strategic plan ahead of time, I'm wondering if that came before, and if you, if within your strategic planning, if that was one of your goals, was to do some more outreach to the Black community, and if not, was it something to look at?
No, it absolutely was. Absolutely was. So we actually have a lot of anti-racism work built into our strategic plan. So this was like several ways this ticked a lot of boxes on our strategic plan, but also one important idea that we have is that we are not the experts of Cambridge history, and that everyone in Cambridge is, and we really share that power. And that's really important to us. And these events really just demonstrated that. We're basically, we even say that we share the mic and the platform, and that's what we did. So we just said, you know, tell us everything you know about your house and your experiences in Cambridge, and it was great.
It was an interesting juxtaposition to have Professor Miles talking about her more traditional research. Now, her book is amazing, and although her research about Harriet Jacobs is more traditional with her students, to pair that with the lived experience of Dr. Ward and her family, and it was a great example of you're your own historian in a way, and I urge you to listen to Janie Ward's YouTube. It's astonishing. We told Marieke afterwards that she needed to book part 2 and book it for 2 hours, that we would all just listen to Janie forever. Thank you, Marieke. So we're going to end up in the Merrimack River Valley with Susan at Lawrence.
Good evening, everyone. I thank you so much for inviting me and on behalf of the Lawrence History Center to be part of this programming, and especially a special thanks to the Bridge Street Foundation for funding that we received earlier this year. As I look through all of the funding that we have gratefully received from Mass Humanities, it's sort of weaves into every area of difficulty and opportunity that we faced across the last year, all across many years in terms of their overall support, but support for general operating through CARES Act and support grants, digital capacity grants to help us do more online to capture knowledge held by experienced local historians and volunteers. And the Bridge Street Foundation specifically helped us carry off a program and a community symposium that we held on May 1st. The History Center, so some background, was founded in 1978 by a German immigrant named Eartha Dengler. We're located in the former Essex Company offices and yard, a site listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and located in downtown Lawrence. The Essex Company was chartered in 1845 to build the Great Stone Dam to sell water power to a textile industry that wasn't here yet. So we hold the bulk of the Essex Company records, and in them are engineering records, sale deeds, all of the records that represent what it took to build this planned industrial city. And we feel that our location is very important to what we do as a research archive. We have thousands and thousands of linear feet of archival materials, and to be housed in the former headquarters of the Essex Company to be able to share and preserve the records of the Essex Company really helps us to tell a broader story of this immigrant city, an immigrant city then and an immigrant city now. The groups, the locations that people have come from has changed, but we're very much, I think we're 39% foreign born at this moment in time. So the immigrant stories are continuously told. And the topics, the subject matter in our archive really covers all curriculum areas, and really every local, regional, national, and even international story that you want to read about, we have information in our archive for researchers to come to explore. Lawrence is a small city, 6.5 square miles of landmass, and so we're able to provide a really significant snapshot for researchers who come from all over the world, but from local institutions like MIT, Harvard, UMass Lowell, the whole system. We get interns and researchers to come into the archive to learn more. The Bridge Street Grant funded 3 speaking programs that were part of our broader 11th session academic symposium. We have been doing these since 2012, when we commemorated the centennial anniversary of the 1912 Bread and Roses strike. After that, we tackled urban renewal, and then public health. Who would have thought that public health might have been relevant in 2018 when we commemorated the centennial of the 1918 flu pandemic. And then, I'm sorry, and we've also covered new immigration, so post-World War II immigration into the city. Our next symposium, the topic of which was chosen at least a year before the Merrimack Valley gas explosions, certainly before the pandemic became known to us, but that topic was public safety. And in the wake of the racial unrest throughout the country after the death of George Floyd, all of the other issues that were coming forth related to COVID and shutdowns and difficulties across the board, having this subject of public safety got more and more relevant as we moved forward. But how to tackle this subject in a virtual way was the biggest question that we had. Really, in prior years, we were able to convene anywhere from 170 to 300 people in an adjacent mill space. That's 500 square foot mill space right out my window here. And we're able to bring people together around difficult topics. And how do we take probably the most challenging topic and convene people in a virtual way around that, which had so many facets. So as an archive, the subject of public safety has many things under that umbrella. But as we learned that public safety to segments of the population is the police or racialized violence. So we had to step back and really think about what our mission as an organization is, as a non-political organization, struggling with topics of bias or neutrality. As an archive, you certainly don't want to teach a single narrative. So getting this funding from Bridge Street helped us in a lot of ways, helped us push forward and be able to hold the symposium, which was attended by 130 people virtually. Helped us continue doing that, but helped us explore other platforms other than Zoom, because we had a little additional resources in which to do that. So the platform on which we delivered the symposium panels was called Huba. It's a virtual platform. It's kind of driven by Zoom, but it has more interactive components to it. And delivering content on and that platform also connected us more closely to the Mass History Alliance, the folks organizing the Mass History Conference, the Mass Shrab Board, State Historical Records Advisory Board, on which I'm on, to talk about delivery of content, because the Mass History Conference was also on Huba, and they went after us, so we went first. So there was a lot of dialogue around that. The specific panels we were able to bring through Bridge Street, we were able to bring a speaker, Johanna Fernandez from Baruch College. She delivered our keynote, and the title of that was From Politics of Safety to Equal Protection for All. And conversations that I had with her leading up to her presentation were very representative of the contemporary conversation of people needing to understand other people's walk through this world, and how two words like public safety that are used really in a widespread manner to certain segments elicit different feelings. Comfort, police presence does not elicit fear, it's comfort and safety. But to others, as I said before, it's something very different. And so we had those conversations, and she started her talking about our conversations through text, largely about how those two words made her feel. And I think that conversation was really important to have leading up to it, because again, we all can be in our own bubbles and have our own experience, and then you get hit with someone else's experience, and it's a moment of pause for sure, where half the people I shared that dialogue with felt like it was not there was a lack of I don't know, that it wasn't right that what she did was sort of criticize the title of our symposium of using the words public safety. So and then others felt like that's a fantastic opportunity for dialogue, which is where I kind of ended up. Anyway, a lot of background to that. I don't want to get specifically into it, but it was a moment of pause that let the organization know that you need to stand back and revisit how you do what you do. Like, your mission is your mission, but is it including everyone in your community and opening up a dialogue? So not teaching a single narrative, but providing and facilitating opportunities for conversations which her keynote certainly did. It engaged the younger. Lawrence has a history of social activism. Behind me is a mural funded by Mass Humanities that was from the Bread and Roses strike, a spontaneous assembly of strikers behind me. History throughout from the moment Lawrence began to now. So this keynote engaged a lot of young activists, people involved in local politics, people involved in education, people working in the not-for-profit and the public sector, all over across the board, really got the conversation going. And that's what we want, because so much that happened across the, well, has happened for a lot, but particularly through the pandemic, was people in their corners, people who, you know, have like two ways of thinking. It's you're either this or you're that. And I think that once we listen to each other speak, we see that it becomes a little more gray. And so that was really important. And so another session that was sponsored by Bridge Street was something on workplace safety. Well, that was the overarching thing. It was about the Pemberton Mill collapse. And then we were able to bring in Marianne Tresciati from Hofstra to talk about the triangle shirtwaist fire, excuse me. And so that was talking about then, but also very much now, what's happening in the labor force, what's happening in workplace safety, what's happening overseas, and that whole evolution of labor and workplace safety. And another one that the Bridge Street funds funded was our lunchtime presentation, which was done by a local not-for-profit arts and social justice organization called Elevated Thought. They addressed the Merrimack Valley gas explosions that happened here. We're now, I think, about our 3-year anniversary out of that. They revisited a film that they did called The Boiler Project, which was soon after the gas explosions happened, but interviews with residents in the city. And then we brought those residents back. They facilitated it to talk about what their feelings were now, you know, nearly 3 years later. And it was a really interesting dialogue, hearing from people when you experience trauma and you experience trauma, and then how the evolution of your thinking goes as the years go by. But just learning that the gas explosions revealed a lot about the community, about housing, about infrastructure that had not been tended to, about really all sorts of social and socioeconomic factors that Lawrence experienced, that the neighboring communities, Andover and North Andover, experienced initially, but not in the long term. So the funding really helped us to facilitate that community conversation in a virtual way, and not run away from it. I mean, I think what's really important is that if conversations are difficult, it's easy to say, oh, it's a pandemic, we're not going to do that this year, we're going to wait. And we didn't wait, and we didn't wait because we got support from Mass Humanities. And all of the sessions were filmed. There were 11 sessions. They also, there were also sessions about criminal justice on the ground in policy and practice and in education. We had sessions on applying science of child development to improve public safety in Lawrence. We had a retired judge who was on the bench for decades talking about the impact of public safety and the criminal justice system in the city of Lawrence and young people growing up here. And then we had
Susan, I'm going to interrupt you because you raised such an interesting question that I want to give people an opportunity to think about, which is whether these difficult conversations, and I think all of us want our organizations to be places where you can have difficult and important conversations informed by history, and whether those difficult conversations are actually more easily done in this format than they are face-to-face. Either because of who will come or who will speak up or how they'll speak, or a sense of safety or anonymity, or whether it's so impersonal. I'm wondering what you all feel, all of you feel, about how maybe you've been able to sneak into people's lives by virtue of the electronic platform in a way that maybe you weren't all that, maybe you were afraid to do in person, that people would look you in the eye and say, what are you doing? Anyone?
For us, it's a mix of both, really. For us, I mean, certainly the online format invites a broader conversation because we have people coming from across the country, and people, Laurentians, that diaspora, that they're elsewhere, so you can invite a larger conversation. But in person, in our experience, has been really beneficial too. I mean, I don't know, I guess maybe online, maybe people could feel a little bolder to say things, or put things in the chat, or not put their camera on and talk and that sort of thing. We had some tactful moderation happening in some of the sessions, for sure, because people, and usually the more controversial comments happened in anonymity, since they didn't put their name on the thing, but nothing terrible, and I think it was respectful overall. People have different opinions in this country, and the demonizing of both or either side is not helpful to anything going forward. So it's quite destructive, and so I think any format that we can do, I think we need to do things in different formats. Do it online, do it in person, do it a hybrid, although hybrid's awful, but anyway, from an administrator standpoint. But anytime you can bring people together around those differences, you should do it. Because as I talked about being neutral as an archive, and the single narrative and the danger of that, or people talk about it in educational programs, just I'll leave it at single narrative. But if you have a collection, you can't tell your researchers what they're going to find, or you can't do their research for them and come to a conclusion for them. They need to do that themselves. I mean, naturally you'd step in if there are factual things that are wrong, and give guidance, but I think it's a danger for organizations like ours to be branded as this or that.
Mm-hmm.
We're open to everyone. Everyone can come in here, and so.
So what about the rest of you? Do you think your conversations have been better or worse online?
It's interesting when you say, and I was remembering that in 2018, we did a program here, obviously in person, about the Boston bombing. As you know, the Boston bombers were from Cambridge. And we had a program where friends of Jahar had done a movie, a short film, and they talked about it. And it was wildly successful with people attending, audience, but people just needed to get their feelings out. And there were moms who stood up and were like, I love Jahar, like he was my son. Like that was it. That's all she had to say. And it was just like incredibly moving. So it's interesting, Susan, when you talk about like people needed to talk about this thing that just happened, like there's still like these residual feelings and we need to talk about, and our history places a good platform for that. I thought we were, and we just let people come and talk about their feelings. There was great value in that. So that would not have happened virtually. People needed to be in the same room and like bump into each other, give a hug. I haven't seen you since forever. And you really felt that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Karen or Lesley, have you seen a qualitative difference in the nature of engagement? And
I mean, I'm in the sort of odd position of really becoming much more involved with the museum during COVID. So I'm not maybe the best person to say those comparative things. But I think there has been, so the program last night, where one of the things that we're doing is through the support of the Massachusetts Historical Commission, are having the National Register of Historic Places nomination for the property revised to be able to tell. It was written in 1973. It doesn't tell most of the things that we think are most important about the site now, And so, you know, it's all about the chair, or really the walls, the fireplaces. So trying to did a presentation on that and made a space that was really about saying, all of you local farm families here, tell us about farming in the 20th century in Hadley. Where were the milk runs? Who, you know, how did that, and that's the kind of things Marieke is talking about in terms of making space for local people to tell local history. That's not written down anywhere. That's not very easy to get, and that there's a lot of local knowledge. And, you know, I think there was some of both. I think there were both more local farmers who were not going to get online, but there also were people who might not have felt as comfortable speaking in it, if it had been like a full room rather than just their own little square.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Thank you. We have a question in the chat, which could take us really far off topic. And it's not anything I prepared you all to talk about. But Memory is asking to Karen's, it ties to what Karen was saying, which is about really giving over authority completely to community members. The question is about exhibitions, but let's broaden that out if you don't have anything about exhibitions, because you all work with community in different ways. And what do you think about when you think about giving over authority to community, when you share the mic and the platform, when you let the community set the agenda for a conversation, either for a program or for an exhibition or for a publication or whatever? What goes on in your mind?
I can actually address that in two different ways, Laura. I've actually worked on a community-centered exhibit. The 50th anniversary, I was the curator at Hancock Shaker Village for many years, and our 50th anniversary exhibit actually brought in what we were calling guest curators to curate the exhibit. So someone got to choose whatever they wanted, whatever shaker object they wanted, to be in the exhibit, and then tell about exactly why they chose it. And so we had actually people like, and these are community members in the Berkshires. Yo-Yo Ma does have a house here, so he joined us. And Al Roker. So it was a lot of fun, and it was a lot of fun to meet them and to find out what their connection to Shaker was. So doing an exhibit like that can be really fun, to include people, to ask people bring them into your collection, show them what you have, introduce them to all of the unique things that you have that, you know, maybe don't get shown a lot. The other piece to that, I was going to say, actually, again, goes back to our Expand Massachusetts Stories grant, and something that we will be doing. We are actually engaging an archive here that it's a small archive, and the unfortunate name of it is called the Invisible Communities Collection. We are going to rename the archive. And then what we are going to do is we will have 3 community conversations about expanding this archive. So we are engaging with 3 different communities in the Berkshires. And this is just initially, we hope to bring in more communities, but right now it's the Stockbridge-Muncie community, the African-American community, and the Latinx community. So what we are doing is having community conversations saying, we want your stories told, and then asking them, what should we be collecting? What should be in this museum? What do you want to see preserved? Because this is your history too, your history in the Berkshires. So that is actually something we will be doing with the Expand Massachusetts Stories grant.
I'd love to just say a little thing about the Documenting Early History of Black Lives project. So what that project did is has a bunch of historical societies and history museums and just different repositories in the Connecticut River Valley, and it embedded UMass grad student researchers in them to help lead that, but the basic structure is a kind of barn raising structure of just having anybody who wanted to come volunteer to do research on this day, all come to this historical society. We have a list of the names we know of African-American families in that town or in the region. Look for them, see if you find other people who we don't know their names yet, building a database. And it really, you really got quite a mix of community people who came and learned how to page through, folders and records and found things. And it was so exciting, both in terms of the things we found and the amount of one of the things that was most moving to me in the Hadley records was seeing how in the records of the Hadley Overseers of the Poor, more affluent members of the Black community in Hadley, people who owned houses or owned some land, would then get money from the overseers to provide support for more Indigenous members of the Black community. And so partly that's undoubtedly about who wants to take poor Black people into their homes, but it was also really a savvy use of town of Hadley resources for the Black community to help each other. And it just, I don't know, it was just a lovely thing to find. And it was a lovely thing to find in a kind of community helping each other to recover these stories way.
Thank you. Thank you. We've got to wind up. I think we have invented another grant program for Mass Humanities. Catherine, I hope you're paying attention, which would be the Democratizing History grant category. If democracy demands wisdom.
That's all our grant categories, Laura.
But let's really think about that theme of really putting the power and the authority for history in the hands of the people who have lived it. Brian, you get the last word.
My one last word is thanks. My experience tonight has been yet another opportunity to really hear directly from you all and the many things that come up when we do get to talk. In full transparency, when we thought about the Bridge Street Fund back in, it was really late 2019, late 2020, a lot of the conversations were about how to just make sure we were still providing some funding to just help out in the meantime as we were getting the other opportunities up and running. And then these online programs started coming up and we said, okay, let's put it towards this. I'm kind of a silver linings person, and I think the things you all are talking about, not just about reaching audience, but about people being able to participate in this local history because of this new format, is really, really important, and something that, whatever the course of the pandemic, is going to continue to grow. And I think is a place for us over this last year of seeing this work being done. It was almost a way to tap in directly to what you're thinking about. You didn't have to think about putting things on the wall or what it was going to cost to come in the door. It was really a direct window, and to see that grow into these Expand Massachusetts Stories grants and now the Democratizing History grants is really, really exciting. So thanks for ending up our week in a really positive place. I really do appreciate all of you being here tonight.
Thank you for including us.
Thank you to the panel, and have a good weekend, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Drive home safe.
Bye.